The crisis of silence. There comes a moment in almost every spiritual journey when the heavens go silent. You pray, you plead, you cry out from the depths of your soul, and all you receive in return is silence. No sign, no answer, no light breaking through the clouds, just a hollow stillness that echoes louder than any thunder. This silence, this unbearable quiet, is not just the absence of sound, it's the absence of response, the aching void where comfort should be, and it shakes us in the deepest places. Because what do you do when even God seems to disappear? This is not the silence of a quiet morning, it is the silence that follows loss, that arrives after tragedy, that settles in when your world collapses and the heavens do not intervene. You ask, why didn't you stop this? Are you even there? Do you care? And when no answer comes, the silence grows heavy, not just spiritual, but existential. The silence of heaven begins to sound like abandonment, like rejection, like a talking to a wall made of stars and dust. Many have walked this path. Job did. So did David. So did Jesus himself, crying out on the cross, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Even C.S. Lewis, the great defender of faith, wrote with trembling hands after losing his beloved wife, "Where is God? Go to him when your need is desperate, when all other help is in vain." And what do you find? A door slammed in your face, and the sound of bolting and double bolting on the inside. This is the crisis of silence, not just the silence of God, but the silence within ourselves that follows, the doubts it awakens, the foundations it cracks, the loneliness it amplifies. Because the silence of heaven doesn't just hurt, it threatens to undo everything we thought we believed. Suddenly, all the songs and scriptures feel distant, all the prayers seem hollow, the warmth of faith turns cold, and the soul begins to shiver. It's easy to believe when we feel heard, when prayers are answered, when blessings are visible. But what happens when nothing moves, when the heavens don't part, when no voice says, "I am with you"? This is not where many sermons begin, but it's where many journeys of real faith do. Because before there is light, there is often darkness. Before there is resurrection, there is death. Before there is clarity, there is confusion. And sometimes, the silence is not the absence of God, but the very place where he begins to speak in a different language. But to hear that language, we first have to be honest. The silence hurts. It terrifies. It tests us. This is the dark night of the soul, not a metaphor, but a lived reality. And if you're in it, you are not alone. What if this silence is not punishment, but invitation? Not rejection, but preparation. In the next part of this reflection, we'll begin to explore that possibility. But for now, to stay here, in the silence. Let it speak to you not with answers, but with presence. Because sometimes the silence itself is the sacred beginning. When God hides, the pattern of divine silence in Scripture and soul. If you feel that the silence of God is unique to your life, look again. From the first pages of Scripture to the dark hours of modern saints, divine silence is not the exception, it is a pattern. It is not the absence of God's love. It is a deeper mode of his presence. In the book of Job, we witness a man stripped of everything: his family, his wealth, his health. His friends offer bad theology. His prayers go unanswered. He begs for explanation, justice, relief. But for 37 chapters, God says nothing. And when God finally speaks, it is not with comforting. He doesn't explain Job's suffering. He speaks from a whirlwind. He reminds Job of the mysteries of creation, the boundaries of the sea, the foundations of the earth. In other words, God answers, but not the way we expected, and perhaps not in the way Job wanted. Even Jesus, in the Garden of Gethsemane, prays with blood in his sweat. "Let this cup pass from me," he cries. Silence. And again, "My God, why have you forsaken me?" If the Son of God was not spared this silence, why should we be? But why would a loving God hide? There is a strange tenderness in this divine concealment, because silence forces a shift inside us, from seeking answers to seeking presence, from demanding clarity to learning trust. God's silence is not a sign of absence. It is a space he creates so that we can grow in depth. Silence purifies our motivations. Do we follow God for the blessings or because he is truth, beauty, goodness itself? In times of silence, all spiritual bargains break down. There are no more transactions. No more "if you bless me, I'll serve you." Only one question remains: will I stay when I hear nothing? That question echoes through every true faith journey. Abraham waited decades for a child. Joseph spent years in prison, forgotten. David fled from enemies, crying out in caves. And yet, through all this, God was not absent. He was forming something. Silence is not empty. It is full of divine intention. Think of the seed again, buried, silent, invisible. For a long time, nothing appears to be happening. But in the hidden darkness, something essential is taking root. In the same way, the silence of God may be preparing you, not punishing you, forming a deeper foundation that can hold the weight of something eternal. In psychology, this is similar to the liminal space. a transition zone between identities, a season where the old has died but the new hasn't yet emerged. It is lonely, frightening, but it is also the place where authentic transformation happens. In spiritual terms, this is wilderness, desert, exile, the place where all illusions fall away. And here's the paradox: God often feels most absent when he is doing his most intimate work, because his silence is not indifference. It is a holy pause. It's the silence before a word is spoken that will reshape your life. The silence before the dawn breaks. The silence before the stone is rolled away. But the question remains, how do we survive this silence? How do we keep walking when every step feels like wandering? That's what we'll explore next. Because even in the silence, there is a path, and even in the wilderness, there is bread. The inner ear. How to listen when God stops speaking. What do you do when heaven is quiet? Some walk away. Some numb the ache. Some build louder distractions. Others, a few, begin to listen differently. Because maybe the silence of God isn't silence at all. Maybe we've just been listening with the wrong ears. In times of spiritual silence, what dies first is our addiction to noise, to emotional highs, to religious certainty, to immediate comfort. What remains is emptiness. And in that emptiness, a deeper listening can be born. There is an inner ear, a spiritual sense that can only be awakened through stillness and surrender. And though it takes time, though it feels unnatural at first, this is where the soul begins to mature. This is the season of learning how to listen without expectation, to be present without demand, to trust without visible results. Psychologists describe this capacity as distress tolerance, the ability to sit with pain, uncertainty, or ambiguity without immediately reacting or escaping. But on a spiritual level, it's more than a technique. It's an orientation of the heart. It's the shift from God, speak to me, to God, shape me, even in your silence. C.S. Lewis said something profoundly honest about prayer. We must lay before him what is in us, not what ought to be in us. In other words, don't pray with perfection. Pray with reality. Even if all you have is confusion, grief, or anger, bring your silence too. The inner ear learns not to hear words, but to feel presence. Not to seek fireworks, but to recognize warmth. Not to demand a plan, but to learn how to rest in mystery. This listening is slow. It is not instant, like a phone call or a Google search. It is more like waiting for a tree to grow, for a wound to heal, for the sun to rise. And yet, in this slowness, something extraordinary begins. You start to hear life itself differently. A line in a book that pierces your heart, a conversation that stirs an old longing, a memory that returns, not to haunt you, but to heal you. The breath you forgot to notice, the silence that no longer feels hollow, but holy. These are not random. They are whispers, subtle signals, echoes of a God who speaks not just in words, but in being itself. But this kind of listening also requires letting go of formulas, letting go of certainty, letting go of the idea that if you do everything right, God will reward you with instant clarity. Spiritual maturity means accepting that God is not a vending machine, that love sometimes speaks through absence, that silence is not passive, it is sacred. Monks, mystics, and prophets throughout history have all described this paradox. The closer they came to God, the more silent he seemed to become. And yet, they grew deeper in joy, peace, and compassion, because they were no longer relating to a God of answers, but to a God of presence, a God who doesn't always explain, but always sustains, who doesn't always intervene, but always walks beside, who may seem distant, but is somehow intimately near. Maybe that's what the silence is teaching you now, not how to escape, but how to stay, how to remain rooted, how to become still enough to sense the holy beneath the chaos. This is not easy, but it is sacred, and once you begin to hear with your inner ear, you realize the silence wasn't empty. It was full of things you weren't ready to hear. Until now, the gift of absence. How silence makes us whole. We often think of absence as a curse, the lack of love, the missing voice, the unanswered prayer. But what if absence, even the absence of God, is not always a void to be feared, but a space to be honored? What if the places where we feel abandoned are, in truth, the places where we are most deeply invited to grow? There is a strange kind of love that hides, not to punish, not to reject, but to make space for something new to awaken in us. It's the love that says, I will not force myself upon you. I will not rush your process. I will wait with you in the dark until you are ready to see. C.S. Lewis, again grieving the silence after his wife's death, came to a painful realization. When I lay these questions before God, I get no answer, but a rather special sort of no answer. It is not the locked door. It is more like a silent, certainly not as though he shook his head not in refusal but waving the question, like, peace, child, you don't understand. This is the gift of absence. It removes the scaffolding. It takes away the props. and it leaves only the raw soul, naked, searching, vulnerable, and ready. Absence demands a response. Will you give up, or will you grow into someone who can carry presence even when you don't feel it? The silence of God becomes holy when we realize this. It is a mirror that shows us where we've placed our trust, a mirror that reveals the places we avoid, a mirror that asks, what if God is closer than your feelings allow you to believe? In psychology, this echoes the process of integration, the long, often invisible work of bringing unconscious wounds into conscious awareness, of rebuilding the inner architecture of your soul from the inside out. This work can only happen in stillness, in slowness, in silence. It is in silence that we realize we are not in control, and yet we are not abandoned. We begin to see that silence is not punishment. It is participation. God is not performing for us. He is inviting us to become co-creators of our own transformation. And here is the paradox. The silence that once felt like absence begins to feel like trust, because only someone who trusts you gives you space to grow. Only a wise teacher steps back when you are ready to wrestle with the truth yourself. Only a deep love lets you fall and rise and discover your strength. That strength is already in you, the voice you were longing to hear. Maybe it has been speaking through your perseverance all along. Sometimes we ask for miracles, but what we really need is sometimes we ask for light, but what we're receiving is roots. Sometimes we ask for answers, but what we're relearning is how to become the kind of person who can carry the answer when it finally comes. So let the silence shape you. Let it carve out the shallow parts of your faith. Let it deepen your capacity for stillness, compassion, truth, because in the absence, something holy is forming, something real, something whole. You are not being abandoned. You are being remade. When the silence breaks, the dawn after the dark night, and then sometimes softly, sometimes suddenly the silence begins to lift. Not with a loud voice from heaven, not with all the answers, but with something smaller, something deeper, a moment of peace where there was only restlessness, a breath that feels lighter, a tear that no longer burns, a whisper in your heart that says, you are not alone. The silence breaks, not with certainty, but with presence. It doesn't erase the night, but it reveals that dawn was always coming. C.S. Lewis, after walking through his grief, did not return to the same faith he had before. He returned to a deeper one, a faith no longer dependent on feelings or answers, but rooted in love that survives the silence. He wrote, I now know, Lord, why you utter no answer. You are yourself the answer. Before your face questions die away, what other answer would suffice? This is the transformation that silence makes possible. Not a God who explains himself, but a God who offers himself. Not a faith that always feels good, but a faith that holds fast when nothing feels good. Not comfort without cost, but meaning forged in the furnace of mystery. And maybe that's where you are right now. Maybe you've been waiting, aching, searching for a word from above. Maybe you've felt like you're losing your faith. But what if what's dying is not your faith, but your illusions? What if the silence isn't killing your soul, but clearing space for a truer one to rise? Because here's the truth. Faith doesn't always sound like a hymn. Sometimes it sounds like breathing in the dark, like staying one more day, like praying even when you're not sure anyone's listening. But even the smallest act of faith done in silence is seen, is heard, is held. You may not feel it now, but the one you're crying out to has never left. Not for 1 second. Not even in the silence. So take heart. The silence will not last forever. The night is long. Yes, but morning is coming. And when it does, you will not be the same. You will be stronger, softer, wiser, and more alive than you ever were before. Because you have walked through the silence and found meaning. You have faced the dark and discovered light. You have waited through the night, and now you are blooming.